Hi, I'm Scott Allen Miller. Today on Sam IT here on YouTube, we're going to talk about the difference between what is a backup and what is an archive. Most people understand backups, and when we're dealing with stuff in real life, it's really easy to kind of physically look and see what is a backup. We understand that if we have an original piece of paper and we want a backup, that we might run it through a copier or copy the information onto another page and store it in another location. It's really obvious when something is the original and when something is the backup. In real life, we have the problem that everything is analog and things deteriorate over time, unless we're simply dealing with a number or a code written on a piece of paper that we could accurately repeat time after time. But when we're dealing with digital information, we actually have a challenge in that what is the source actually gets completely cloned, and so it doesn't deteriorate, and each of our copies in different locations are absolutely identical. And this creates some mental weird things to happen when we think about what is the source and what is the backup. In reality, all of our things become simply copies, and we have to think about backups and archives in their relationship to the rest of the universe rather than to where they originally came from. It doesn't matter which thing was the first one, because one is not really a child of the other, they are simply clones. They're all equal peers. So a backup, this is the thing that's really important. Everyone understands what it means to take a backup. We're generally really good about this. We have an original piece of data, we make a copy of it somewhere that is a second copy, and it is decoupled from the first. That means that things like RAID or a synchronous job or a snapshot are not backups on their own, because if the original gets destroyed, that thing that seems like a copy gets destroyed with it. That means it's not a copy, it's just another view of the original. In the case of something like RAID, there's really extreme cases where, yes, they are two copies, but if you were to overwrite them, they get destroyed at the same time. So RAID is a highly coupled copy, making it not a backup. The idea of being decoupled is absolutely crucial. If you were to destroy the original, it should not guarantee the destruction of the copy or the backup to be a backup. The thing that gets complicated is that once we've taken a backup, we have to remember that that copy is only a backup as long as the original exists. The moment the original ceases to exist, that's not a backup anymore. It may have been backed up, but it's no longer a backup. It becomes the only copy. Once something's the only copy, if we really ask that question, we understand that the only copy is never a backup. What's it a backup of? Nothing. There's no source. Oh, so it becomes the source. So the concept of a backup that no longer has the original is weird, and we need to understand that once that happens, it's no longer a backup. It's simply our one copy. Now, in most cases, when we take a backup, we also have this idea that we're going to send something to this kind of storage. It's archival storage, right? Our production data, the stuff that we access every day, we often call this primary storage or production storage. It's fast, it's online, there's all kinds of things that we assume will be true of our production storage. They may not be, but we expect them to be faster and more available than other kinds of storage. Once we take a backup, it is traditional to put it onto media that is slower, possibly offline, maybe stored in a vault, maybe has a long delay before it can be accessed, or in some way or another is not as expensive as the original storage. It's not always the case, but it's very common and we often assume it. That we can think of as a form of archival storage. Backups generally get put on archival storage. Of course, it's still a backup if it's on a secondary decoupled primary storage device. That doesn't stop it being a backup. We just assume we're not going to spend that kind of money on our backups, but you can. But when we put something onto an archival device and get rid of the original, that copy, or what was a copy, that's now in the archival storage, the lower tier storage, is an archive. It is not a backup because it is the only copy. That's a really important concept because a lot of businesses don't communicate adequately through all the different layers of people who are involved with backup decisions and data retention decisions. And they will start by saying, did we take a backup? Yes, we took a backup. The backup team can confirm we've taken a backup. Then the team that manages the production storage may delete the originals. And this is very important because suddenly the backup storage just became archival. Now, if you were to, for example, have to answer to an auditor or a government agency, do you have backups? The answer is no, we do not. We have archival storage, which may not be very well protected. In some cases, it's incredibly well protected. In some cases, it's not protected at all. Long ago, we didn't used to have this problem too much because we used to take our backups to tape. And typically, we'd have many tapes all with the same or nearly the same data on them. So we would have backups of backups of backups. And taking away the original wouldn't actually affect the fact that those were backups because each of the backups would be backing up each other. And we might have 10 or 20 or 30 copies on tape of the same data. So that production level one isn't necessary for those to be backups. Once we move to things like single copy virtual disk storage, where we have artificial fulls and everything's on a single storage array, when we have that original and that one copy, we may be able to have hundreds of views of that copy, but it's only one backup copy on the archival storage. If we take that original away, now we've taken away the only extra copy that exists, and that is no longer a true backup. So the way we have to think about those things has changed due to general usage of different types of archival media in recent years, in the last 10 or 15 years. So this is just a very important thing because companies easily do not communicate enough through all the different chains and all the different people who are involved to understand when they have taken a backup versus when they have retained a backup versus how many copies of backups they have, to understand what exactly they need to do to be able to have the level of retention and protection that they hope to be able to have. Many companies would be shocked to find out, if senior management was to find out, that what they thought was backups, that they were spending lots and lots of money making many copies, turned out to be no backups at all, and there is one archival copy sitting on what may be very reliable or maybe very unreliable media, because they often also make the decision to use very unreliable media for their quote-unquote backups because it is assumed to be a backup, and that at any time they could recreate the backups from the primary should the backup system be lost. If it truly becomes an archival system, there is no original source from which to recreate that archive. Therefore, it is potentially very much in danger, and that's why it is not a backup. I hope this helps explain why it is so important that these terms be used accurately to convey to each other the difference between a backup, having taken a backup, and having a backup currently, because those simple little semantics are the difference between many copies and one copy, and having a backup and not having a backup. And also very important that when you're talking to especially government auditors where there are backup requirements, when the government requires a backup, they don't mean an archive at all. That is never adequate to meet your legal obligations of backups. Backups must be backups. The government does not play around with loose terms in that way. Thank you for joining me. Remember to like and subscribe. If you have questions, put them below in the comments. And of course, as always, if you want to sponsor us, you can do so on Patreon.